Hello, everybody, and welcome to Comically Incompetent. My name is Doug, and also, Happy New Year. Thank you guys for listening so much throughout 2020. Really appreciate it. But I think 2021 hopefully is going to be a better year, and I think we got some good stuff coming up. I think we got some good Batman movies coming through. And my guest for this 3-episode series is going to be Adam. Adam, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Doug. How have you been, my man?
I've been good. Ready to get going. I love these movies. I cannot wait to actually jump in and kind of get more in depth in these things.
Dude, I'm excited. Yeah, I think kicking off 2021 with a trilogy with this much prowess and this much notoriety is going to be just awesome. A fun segue back from the the Shrek series that you guys just did. Kind of more on a serious note. I think it'll be fun to dive into DC after so many months of Marvel. I think it'll be fun. Happy New Year to everybody. Happy New Year to you as well. Hope you had an excellent holiday, as well as everybody listening and watching. I had some fun with the family, but ready to get back into recording some episodes here.
Awesome. So first order of business before we get into the movies, though, is the beer this week is actually picked by Adam. So Adam's going to go into the beer at the end of the show, but it is Midnight Fog by 12 Degree Brewing. So Adam, you'll go into more of that at the end of the show, which is nice. You're only the second guest ever to do the beer.
Hopefully, if I make it through. This one's it's called Midnight Fog. It's a quadruple, so it's 9.6%. So if I stay awake, then I will be able to describe it at the end. But I love this brewery, and I'm happy to talk about it at the end.
Nice. I don't have the beer is not important for me, but the glass is.
Yep, that's pretty excellent right there.
This is what my sister got me for Christmas, so I appreciate that. I'm very happy with that one.
She knows you well.
Yeah, so I think we'll just hop into the movie now.
Yeah, absolutely.
I forgot to think of a question of the week, so we're just not going to do it.
Okay.
But for me, so Batman Begins, right, 2005, this was kind of like Christopher Nolan I think this was the first time I'd ever personally seen a Christopher Nolan movie, which you and I are both huge Christopher Nolan fans.
Yes. And
this was what set it off for me. I mean, this movie it took Batman, because I loved Batman as a kid. I liked seeing the, what's his name? Michael Keaton Batman, the Tim Burton films. I love those. I thought those were fantastic. And then I never really saw the other ones like Val Kilmer or anything, but seeing this one was such a different take. It was so weird to see such a serious version of Batman, where the other ones were so campy, and it was so interesting to watch kind of that point of view of a Batman movie.
Right. Yeah. It's definitely a transition. It kind of reminds me of The Incredible Hulk. When we went over that for, a lot of the versions had, kind of aimed at being a little bit serious, but like you said, kind of campy, of the very telling of the time that they were in. And this is just such a departure from, the typical kind of happy-go-lucky, bam, wow, pow, that, we're used to. But I think this is a really good movie to kind of set the tone for The Dark Knight, as opposed to what Batman had been known as up until this point.
Yeah, and I think one of the rumors I heard is that Christopher Nolan only started doing these movies to pay for, I think the project was Interstellar, or to get to the point of maybe paying for, I think it was Interstellar, or one of his other Inception, one of those movies. But I mean, this is such a cool movie. This is I think this is what a lot of people, especially our generation, think of Batman. Now it's now the standard has been set. So when Zack Snyder did Ben Affleck, it was it's not going to work. We know what a good Batman movie is, and this isn't it.
Yeah, and that was hard too, because it came so soon after Christopher Nolan had made his mark, on the DC universe, and I kind of wanted to see, maybe Christian Bale come back and reprise his role with the Henry Cavill, but I think they're just separate entities, and this trilogy is just so self-contained. And with everything that went on with actors and actresses around it, I think it's perfectly tied up here, and doesn't need to be part of the larger DC universe. Even though there's allusions to other characters here and there, I think it's very it stands alone, very proudly.
Yeah, definitely. And I think for me, I think the way that Christopher Nolan did these movies is I think the villains hold this trilogy together. I think Christian Bale's a great Batman, but when you look at the villains, you have Cillian Murphy as the Scarecrow.
Yeah.
Awesome. Fantastic. That dude's an amazing actor, first of all, let alone that role. Obviously, Heath Ledger is the Joker.
Right.
Amazing.
Untouchable.
just, I mean, we'll get into that in the next one, but I mean, that could be just him as the Joker as a whole episode in itself, let alone the movie.
Right.
And then Tom Hardy as Bane, which I wasn't the biggest fan of, but even then he still did such a good job. I think I think you have a lesser actor in that role, the movie would have tanked, but Tom Hardy did such a good job. He carried that character through some of the rough spots of that movie. And I think, Christian Bale's a great Batman, but when you look at the world around him and the actors that they have, Michael Caine as Alfred.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, probably the best Alfred we'll see on screen. Gary Oldman as Jim Gordon, fantastic. Right. Kills it. Liam Neeson as Ra's al Ghul. Like, the world was just, like, Morgan Freeman as Lucius Fox. Like, this was
I know, it's just peppered with, A-list actors, and it's just a recipe for success. And, back to your point of where you're saying the villains kind of carry the series, I totally agree. I think they took a risk on Batman Begins with putting a lot of villains in. I think going into it, we're expecting Ra's al Ghul, we're expecting Scarecrow. But there's a lot of other, there's Falcone, who's kind of, this little, gangster mob guy who's just kind of crawling around doing all these, behind the scenes things. And then you have whoever the head, the CEO of the company was, when Bruce left, who's kind of undermining him, but is also helping run the company. And I think it was a gamble there. It could have been, or they could have overshadowed the main villains, but I think they did a good job of making them look more like henchmen on the underside.
Yeah.
And let, the Scarecrow and Ra's al Ghul kind of take the reins in the lead villain category.
Yeah, I thought, because for me, I wasn't the biggest Batman fan growing up. Like, I liked Batman, comic book-wise. I liked Batman, but I didn't know a whole lot of it outside of the movies. So for me, like, I had no idea who Ra's al Ghul was. I knew the Scarecrow. Mm-hmm. But so that was kind of like, I think they did a good job of having two villains. One, I think that was kind of big in pop culture, and one that wasn't so much at the time, and it kind of leveled out. And then Ra's al Ghul became a big villain. Now he was in the show like Arrow and the CW verse and all that stuff.
Right.
And then then later movies as well. We'll get into that in the third episode. But yeah, I mean, this movie is so well done. I think that also just has to do with Christopher Nolan as a director, and at this point his basically work in cinematographer, Wally Pfister, who did all of his movies up until, I think, Interstellar, pretty much.
Right, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the dynamic duo up until that point.
Yeah, I mean, this was one of the first movies that, like, to sound as much as a film student as possible, like, the color palette was interesting. Yes. Like, those blues and yellows were so prominent in this movie, and a lot of it was very orange, and, like, it was very interesting to see, like, his style kind of bring in, like, I also think it's interesting to this Gotham was so different than the Gotham we see in the later movies. This Gotham was like covered in smoke, and it was dark, and it was gritty, and it was like the underground was such a big part of it. Whereas then you get to the Dark Knight Rises, and you're kind of above like that high class side of it. And you're in the higher end of Gotham.
Right, and I think that kind of is very telling of the origin story that we have here. Because, we have a lot of flashback scenes where we see kind of Gotham at its height, at its peak, with Thomas Wayne in charge of Wayne Enterprises, kind of running, the company, running the city, at times, I'm pretty sure they said at one point that, like, Wayne Enterprises almost went bankrupt when he was trying to save Gotham, and it really showed because, the criminals are there and, equally opposing, authority.
Yeah,
and so it's very interesting to see kind of the height of Gotham, and then the fall, and then again the height. It's this kind of duality that kind of matches Bruce Wayne's own progression, I think.
Yeah. Do you remember seeing this movie in theaters at all? 'Cause I don't know. I don't think I saw this one in theaters.
No, I think I saw this. I think we got it from Netflix back when they were in the mail.
Yeah, shipping
DVDs. I'm pretty sure we still have the Netflix DVD, because that's what you would do back in the day. You would just keep it, and then they'd be like, "Oh, we're gonna charge you another $1," and you're like, "Okay, it's still not as much as paying for the movie." But I remember, really liking it. It's definitely not at all what I expected. Going into it, when you see Batman Begins, you're thinking, "Oh, we're gonna get a ton of Batman in this movie. It's gonna be a lot of fan service." But no, it's a completely different route, and I think for at least the first half of the movie, it's Bruce Wayne Begins, and you see the origin and the investment of the character into the superhero, which only makes his role in the movie is more important later on, having that that precursor and that backstory.
Yeah, which for an origin story, I like that because this was really the first Batman we'd seen in a long time to this point. I mean, we had the 80s and then kind of some campy one-offs here and there, but for them to do a full origin story but not make it feel redundant, I thought was really cool because you have these like I don't want to watch in a Spider-Man movie Uncle Ben die again, but they did a good job of taking this and going, most people pretty much know the situation. We'll give them like that little shot. They'll come out of the back of the theater. It happens. Bruce Wayne's parents are killed, and then they kind of would just move on, and then they move into Bruce as an adult. And like you said, it very much Bruce Wayne begins in that sense. So I like that the origin story wasn't like the first hour of the movie building into an origin. It was like, here's what happened. This is what happened to him. Okay, now let's move into why he's doing what he's doing and like kind of build his universe a little bit more than just like his family.
Exactly. And in a very Christopher Nolan fashion, very Memento-esque, kind of going forward and then backwards to when, Bruce and Rachel are kids. He falls down. And at points it gets a little bit forced. I felt like, the theme of fear and like, he's falling and, bats, oh man. And then he's afraid of this and he's overcoming this. But I think that just drives, Bruce Wayne's ambition and, personal struggle, more, the more they kind of drive that theme home.
Yeah, because when I'm watching it for this show, I hadn't seen it in a long time. Like, I watched The Dark Knight a million times, but I hadn't seen this one in a while. And to watch it again, you're right. There's some moments where I was like, okay, we can kind of speed this thing up a little bit. We can keep it moving. But once he was Batman, I think that it was paced out beautifully from then on. You got enough Bruce Wayne, you got enough Batman, it worked really well. At the beginning, I could see it being a little paced a little slowly. But I do like, we have that famous line from the series where it's like, when his dad takes him for a while, he's like, why do we follow Bruce? So we can learn to so we can get back up again. Like, right. I like that. I think that's like one of the most iconic lines. But looking at Christopher Nolan's like style in his movies, I mean, this was, I think, his first big movie in the U.S., I believe. I think he hadn't done too much. This is 2005, so maybe...
I think Memento was before this, but still...
Yeah, Memento...
I think a very new style for a lot of Western audiences to kind of adapt to.
Because he'd done Insomnia before this, which... have you seen Insomnia? It's the Al Pacino, Robin Williams. Mm-mm. Very good movie. It's very him. It's... Al Pacino does a great job. Robin Williams plays a villain, which is interesting. And then he did this, but then he did my favorite movie of all time, The Prestige, which we talked about.
Yep, absolutely.
That's phenomenal. Then The Dark Knight, Inception, Dark Knight Rises, Interstellar, Dunkirk. I haven't seen Tenet yet, but I want to.
Yeah, and it's fun to see a lot of this cast come along for the the Nolan ride, and to kind of see all of these characters in a new role. It's fun to see the same actors in the same Nolan universe, portraying absolutely different characters and, carrying it out flawlessly. Yeah. And, looking at The Prestige, I don't see, Christopher or Christian Bale as Batman. Yeah. I see the magician, and Alfred in that, I don't see him as, the butler, but, we see him as, his role in that, and they embody that so well. And Christopher Nolan just has that vision that just kind of drives creativity.
Yeah, I think one thing that we see in this movie too, like we were talking about the casting earlier, Christopher Nolan, and I don't know who his casting agent or who has his like head of casting on his movies is. I don't know if he's carried them throughout, but I mean the talent there and pulling in these actors that I remember when Heath Ledger was cast, everyone's like, Heath Ledger can't be the Joker. He's just the pretty boy from 10 Things I Hate About You. He's not the Joker. And then he did it, and everyone's like, oh shit, okay. And I remember I thought that too. I was kind of like, who's Heath Ledger? Why is he going to be the Joker? But from that moment on, I never second guessed. I remember when Harry Styles was cast in Dunkirk, and I was like, everyone's like up in arms about it. I was like, hold on, let's just see how he does first. Yeah, and he did. He did a good job. I liked Harry Styles in that movie, or even Anne Hathaway as Catwoman in the third one. I was like, I don't know, but then I was like, hold on, let's wait and see. He does a good job with this. Right. And I think that was
always has a vision.
Yeah, I think that was a big part of seeing this movie is before this movie came out, you see Christian Bale is going to be Batman, and like you're kind of like, okay, that's interesting. How is that going to work? And then you get Michael Caine is Alfred, and you go, that kind of makes sense, but I think a lot of his movies don't seem to work until you see it, and you go, that was perfect. There's nothing I would change about that.
Yeah, it couldn't be any other way. And I think Christian Bale is a great Batman, but you know, like you said, it's kind of the universe that drives the Batman trilogy. And so I think that's really important that we get this initial movie where we see a lot of his like struggle to be both Batman and to be Bruce Wayne, because he's not really an authentic, you know, Bruce Wayne. You know, he kind of goes away for a while and has to find himself, and then comes back and, you know, kind of acts this like pompous billionaire sometimes, or, you know, somebody who actually really cares about his company. There's never really one side of him. It's always just kind of driving the, you know, front business facing agenda to fund his, you know, his back projects.
Yeah, and I think Christian Bale, to what you were saying, played that kind of like torn like character very well. I think that's why you have to have an actor that good who can play the Bruce Wayne, Batman, the multiple sides of Bruce Wayne like kind of character. You have to play 4 or 5 different characters in one character, basically.
Right. Yeah, and I like seeing him in this movie too when he's kind of, you know, still young. You know, Christian Bale is notorious for, you know, transforming his body, his, you know, his persona, his you know, his acting style, his voice for whatever role he's in. And I think you kind of see that kind of wear on him a little bit throughout the trilogy. So it's kind of fun to see him fresh here. And, you know, like when he has the flashback where he comes back for the trial, when he's in his, you know, his schoolboy attire, and he's like, you know, kind of walking up the stairs with when everything's covered. And he's just like, you know what, I don't care, like, sell it. And Alfred's like, no, you don't get to come back here and just, you know, like discount, you know, years of like your history. Like you have to have a little bit more respect than that. And I think he played that, you know, very well.
Yeah, definitely. As far as this movie goes, I mean, I think when we look at the trilogy as a whole, I think this was not as good as The Dark Knight, but better than The Dark Knight Rises. And I think for me, what carries that is Cillian Murphy as the Scarecrow. And I remember I didn't really see him in a whole lot before this, if anything, and I remember being terrified of him. He is freaky in this. To a point where I liked Liam Neeson as Ra's al Ghul, but I was kind of like, why can't we just get him as like the Scarecrow? Because he was so good. He's good at that creepy, like his little, do you want to see my mask? And he puts on the thing and you're just like, oh shit, he's so cool. I love him in this.
He has like the 2 levels of being scary though. Like the one is, you know, he actually is kind of demented. He has this mask. He has all this, you know, villainy type stuff, but also just the power of persuasion. That he has, and his you know, his power, like as much as he can sway, like he's above the law at this point. You know, when people get committed, or, you know, they're supposed to serve a life sentence, he takes them in, you know, under his wing, and is, you know, kind of developing this insane army. You know, and it's just kind of cool to see that maniacal side in somebody so calculated and poised as Cillian Murphy.
And to what you were saying before, also, like, the different villains we have in this movie, I like that the way this movie kind of works is Batman has to work his way up to facing the Scarecrow and Ra's al Ghul. He kind of has to take out the mob. Like, he takes on the mob and has to fight the mob. Then the mob is scared, and there's kind of people on the street. Then it's the bureaucrats and all that stuff. Then it's the Scarecrow. Then it's Ra's al Ghul. Like, he has to kind of level up like a video game to get to the point of, like, fighting the main boss at the end on the train.
Right. Yeah. The movie has an arc, you know, I'd say through the whole thing. You know, it starts off even just with a mini arc of him training with, you know, Liam Neeson, who eventually ends up being Ra's al Ghul, but is his mentor at that point. And then once he thinks he's, you know, ready to kind of take on the world, he goes to applied sciences, tries to kind of up his game a little bit. And that was one thing that I really liked about this movie and, you know, kind of trilogy as a whole, is it feels very real. You know, it feels very visceral. The one thing about Marvel that gets lost sometimes is, you know, at the beginning they, you know, like Iron Man 1, it does feel very real. You know, he's in a cave, he's crafting all of the armor himself. But later on it's kind of like, oh, nanotechnology. Oh, and you just kind of believe it. But I feel like for this whole movie, everything kind of makes sense, you know, more or less. You know, the water vaporizer thing, we'll talk about that later. But yeah, it feels very authentic.
Yeah, that's one thing I've always loved about the DC, like this trilogy, is that a lot of it, until, like, obviously some things not, but a lot of it feels like it could happen. A lot of it feels very real and possible, and it makes it so much more immersive, which is so funny because I feel like DC like Marvel is supposed to feel grounded because it's in real cities like New York and all that stuff. It's supposed to feel real, like it can happen, but it just, like you said, it loses you in some aspects of it. Whereas this is like a billionaire who takes justice into his own hands and builds his own suit and fights a guy who's insane. And it's like, okay, well, this could happen. This feels
right. And doesn't take credit for it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, he's just doing it on his own will. You know, in his absence and his father's absence, I think he kind of feels it's his duty, his responsibility to look over the city that hasn't been cared for so long.
Yeah, I definitely didn't understand a lot of the nuance of this movie when I was seeing it for the first time. I think I saw it on like DVD when it came out, and I missed a lot of like why he's doing it and his motivations and who he is as a character. Because when you're younger, you don't really see that stuff as much, and it's not as apparent to you. But I think when you watch this movie and you have these scenes of him, like you said, in the trial, like those are very visceral, real scenes of dealing with like the aftermath of what happened to him, and like it's not superhero-y, it's not comic booky, it's real, and I like that aspect. That's
he brings
that
a gun, my head, you know, to kill him. You know, he's so frustrated, he doesn't care. He's willing to throw out his family's reputation, you know, everything that his father and, you know, the Wayne name stood for, you know, a little bit of vengeance, for one minute of, ooh, got you back, you know.
Yeah. Which I think, kind of jumping into a little bit more like what happens in the movie, when we open up on this movie, we have one of the beginning parts is, like you said, him training with Ra's al Ghul, and I like that kind of aspect of we're learning where he's getting these abilities. He's not just a billionaire who can all of a sudden fight. He's learning. He's being taught. He's basically being beaten down to the pulp by these people. They're trying to break him down, and I liked the League of Shadows in this movie. I thought that was an interesting way of doing it, and have like interesting character development for him to kind of throw him into this, like he just kind of went out to find himself and fell into the League of Shadows, which I thought was interesting. How it's kind of like, I guess you can kind of put that fate aspect of, I don't know. Am I making sense?
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, just trying to kind of like escape society.
Yeah.
Right, and to kind of get over the superficiality that he had been consumed with, you know, much of his, you know, young adult and adult life, and kind of figure out, you know, what he's supposed to do, you know. And I think he took a lot of that inspiration from his father after, because, you know, when they're riding towards the theater, blah, 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 he's asking his dad. He goes, "Hey, do you work over in that building?" And he goes, "No, I'm a doctor. I work in the hospital.
Yeah.
You know, I help people. That's what I do. You know, I leave that to more interested men," I think is the phraseology that he uses.
Or more capable or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, something like that. But yeah, and so I think he really kind of takes that sentiment to heart, in that, you know, it's not all about, you know, signing papers and firing and hiring people. It's about you at the end of the day, and kind of, you know, who you want to be.
Yeah, and I like that they built his parents not as rich people who just got rich and now they just like live rich and lavish lifestyles, of people who will take the train with everybody else. And they built his parents to be like these such amazing characters that when they're gone, he has to try and figure out how to be like them, because they were such good people. I think I like that they made sure that Chris Nolan made sure that was the theme of his parents were the best that he needs to be, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and and that ultimately, I think, is what he feels responsible for, you know, when they leave the theater, because he gets scared. Obviously he feels that weight on his shoulders. It's not really, you know, it's not his fault. Somebody else killed his dad, you know, obviously. But he, you know, definitely still feels that pressure of, and then kind of learns that humility, you know, later, after he kind of gets over, you know, his grieving period and, you know, his trials and tribulations with the killer.
Yeah. And fuck me. Sorry. What happens next, Adam?
All right. So they're training at the League of Shadows. We think that Ra's al Ghul, you know, the alleged Ra's al Ghul, played by Ken Watanabe, right? And then
oh my god! Which, by the way, such an underutilized character for such a phenomenal actor.
He sits in a chair like a couple times, and you know, I think they kind of allude to the fact that he's not Ra's al Ghul. I never saw the twist coming that it was going to be Liam Neeson the first time. It still gets me a little bit, you know, because he seems like such a great mentor and leader, and kind of this one guy who's navigated the League of Shadows in the most like ethical and like responsible and stoic way. And so I think upon watching the movie the first time, I thought they were going to take out Ken and bring in somebody else, and that was going to be the real Ra's al Ghul.
Yeah,
but it's kind of clear when you leave Liam Neeson alive. It's like he's gonna come back. Like he's one way or another he'll be back.
Yeah, and so with that whole thing of like he does save it. He saves Ra's al Ghul in the end, which I thought was an interesting move. It shows, I think, how he wanted to be the hero, because he at that point he knew something was up with this guy. I think his name he went by Deckard before he was Ra's al Ghul. Like his fake name was Deckard, and you could see like something's up, but he still saved him. And then Bruce Wayne goes back, and that's when he starts to become Batman. But I think that's when this movie for me really kicks off. Is when now he's working with Morgan Freeman's character, Lucius Fox. Now he's getting the suit. Now he's getting the Batmobile, and it's kind of like
he's going in the cave and looking at this underground area in the east quarter or something. Or
I think you earlier you said fan service. This is the fan service part for me. It's getting the suit, and as a fan you're going, that's the suit, that's the Batmobile, those are the Batarangs, that's the Batcave, and like all that stuff. You're like, yes, here we go.
Right. Yeah, I love when he's testing it out. He'll push something that he shouldn't, and things like shoot out, and he's like, oh. It's like that. It still shows that he has a lot to learn. Yeah. Coming back, like he's learned a lot about himself, but now he has to learn again how to be himself in society. And I love the corporate Bruce Wayne versus Batman. Yeah. Like when he goes back to the they're having the shareholders meeting or whatever, and he's talking to the secretary, and the guy tries to like buzz her in or like talk to her, and he's like, what the heck is going on? He's just teaching her golf. They're just golfing in the main room. He's like, I'm back. What's up? You missed me?
Yeah. When you cast the Bruce Wayne, you need someone with like that effortless kind of like charisma,
right,
to make it believable that he could persuade this woman who's working to stop working and play golf for some reason.
Right.
But he does it believably because Christian Bale, when he's in that character, has that effortless kind of charisma, that smile, that look, that like very suave.
Yeah, the charm.
Exactly, the charm that he carries throughout this whole movie. Also, I did like how when we kind of start to meet our villains here, we meeting Cillian Murphy as the Scarecrow in that... And we're also meeting Rachel for the first time as an adult, and I like that they do have some fan service here. As Victor Zsasz is on trial, if you notice, he's got the lines. So he's the guy who, whenever he kills someone in the comics, he does like a dash on his body. Okay. So they're in the trial for that, and this is kind of when you start to realize that Cillian Murphy, the Scarecrow, is trying to get the insane plea for all these criminals so that he can bring them to Arkham, which I did like that part. I liked him kind of, because this is kind of the slow decline of his character of he's a doctor who you know something's wrong, but he's there to help, but you still know something's wrong. Yeah. And it's kind of that slow decline of him kind of pulling people into Arkham. And if you don't know a lot about the DCEU, Arkham is such like a dark place, and so when if you know a little bit about that, it means so much more as he's pulling all these kind of insane people down to Arkham.
Well, and like driving them insane, because when we see the trial, what's the killer's name again?
Victor Zsasz.
Victor, yeah, he seems to have some remorse. I know what I did was wrong. Whether it's an act or not, whatever. He does not visually appear insane.
Yeah.
Until later, and then when you see Rachel confront him, and he's like, he has that, he pulls it off perfectly, where he's just like I don't know what you're talking about. Like he clearly looks insane to me. I talked to him. Like, there's nothing weird going on. He looks insane. Yeah.
Which I did want to say, we have for Rachel's character, we have Katie Holmes in this one, she is then replaced with Maggie Gyllenhaal. But I think Maggie Gyllenhaal in the later movies is a better Rachel, like a better actress. But I think Katie Holmes just looks more like the character.
I agree.
But I think Katie Holmes killed it in this role. She did a great job for her one role that she was in. I think Maggie Gyllenhaal does a great job in later ones. But I think she did a good job of being that kind of... Because when you look at Batman, Batman's supposed to be like a super detective. But Christopher Nolan kind of wrote that out for these movies. She's like the super sleuth in this one. She's the one digging and she's going places she shouldn't be going to find the information because she knows something's up.
Right.
And I like that about her character. I like that they kind of put that in for this one because she's not so much later on when Maggie Gyllenhaal takes over. And that one, she's just kind of in love with Harvey Dent.
Right. And I felt like their Bruce's and Rachel's, romance was kind of downplayed a lot in this movie. You kind of see, they're kind of friends as kids. Okay, maybe they had some history later, but this movie does not really feel like about, at least for the first half of the movie, until they, talk again, and then it's clear that they have feelings, but it's never going to work out. He's leading a double life. She's very involved in work. It's just it's never going to happen. It's kind of, I think, what they were hinting at. Yeah,
which is interesting to me, because I feel like if you skip this one and go straight to The Dark Knight, it almost feels like their relationship is so much more. Like, could have been so much more. Like, Dark Knight seems like there was something. Yeah. There was like love there, where in this one it's just kind of like a faint interest that's just not gonna work out.
Yeah, Maggie Gyllenhaal always has that good Bruce. Like, here we go again.
Yeah, exactly.
Like another this, another that. Like,
yeah.
Yeah.
Which I think going in this movie, there's so much to say about it. We're already half an hour in, but there's just so many good parts to it, and there's so many things that this movie is just such a good job getting the series started.
Yes.
It gets you interested. It builds Bruce Wayne as a character. Because then, like you said, this is very Bruce Wayne-centric. The next one is very Batman-centric. It's Batman and the Joker in that classic fight. So this was so good, just kind of building the universe. This is our characters. This is the world. This is the situation. And it didn't have a lot of, like, an ending, really. I think it just kind of was like, it moved very quickly once he became Batman. It was, he's Batman. Scarecrow's up to something. Ra's al Ghul? Yeah, right. That's the end of the movie.
Yeah, right. And then that's kind of where Batman begins. I don't think you can look at this movie as Batman beginning from the start, but as it being built up and then boom, like we're going to hit the deck running.
Yeah.
From the opening scene of Dark Knight, and that's clearly evident, by how Christopher Nolan carried out the rest of the series.
Yeah, I think this the only downside about this movie for me is I'm watching him going, okay, now we're up. And like the end of the movie happens and you're kind of like, okay, now we're there. Where's the big finish? And there isn't one.
Right.
But that's because it's coming in the next movie and the movie after that. But I think that was the one downfall of that movie is you're kind of waiting for something bigger to happen than just the Ra's al Ghul fight. Right. And nothing does happen. But then if you look at this trilogy as one whole movie, some big shit is going to happen later on.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you know it's coming. And I think it's set up very well, even just from, Batman's costume. He's very rigid in this movie.
Yeah.
And I know they comment on that in The Dark Knight. He's like, oh, you want to be able to move your head. But, like, just looking at him, he's, like, very stocky and, portly. And it's just, like, it's the concept. It's, Mark 1 of Batman. Yeah. Which is fun and kind of brings it's really hard because in The Dark Knight and The Dark Knight Rises there is not a lot of Batman development. It's all about the villains. It's all about the story around him. So I think it's really important that we do get this first movie to just get a lot of the backstory and get a lot of empathy for the character of Bruce Wayne.
Yeah, which I think this movie did a great job of making some of the things that are very Batman cheesy and not cheesy, like how when you look at the concept of Batman from the outside, he's scared of bats, so he became Batman. But when you watch that scene, the way I'm assuming Hans Zimmer did the score, because I think he does most of Christopher Nolan's movies. The way Hans Zimmer, big assumption, Adam, I'm going to put you on that while I talk. The way that it's shot, the way that's edited, the way that the movie works when you have the bats flying up, and everything's kind of working, and he's obviously terrified of the bats, but they made it a scary scene. They did a good job of making it not cheesy in a way that he becomes Batman and you're like, yes, that makes sense. That's good, because I think a lot of it can be, cheesy when you're like, oh no, bats, I'm going to be Batman now. But they didn't do that. Christopher Nolan did a good job of making it work, of making it make sense, of kind of making this story, like you said, feel like it could happen, feel real. And I think that this movie just does a good job of setting up. Like, we have the whole Scarecrow, he's going to release the gas to make everyone scared and see their worst fears and just bring Gotham to his knees. But I think when you look at the later villains, when you have the Joker, who is such a just obviously phenomenal villain, and even Bane, who had more of a purpose than Scarecrow did, I thought this movie, that's what I'm saying. It's like, it led up. You're waiting for something bigger because Scarecrow's ideas are big and he's a good villain. And Ra's al Ghul's ideas are big and he's a good villain. And then it just kind of ends.
Yep.
And you're like, okay, more.
That's what I kind of loved. You were right. It's Hans Zimmer and James Newton Howard who did the score for this.
Awesome.
Going back to the multiple villains thing, and why I think it works so well is because they all have different motives and objectives. None of them are working together. They all have their own, their own vision for how they want to, work into the Gotham story. Falcone's, he's a mob boss. He doesn't want to work with insane people. He just wants to make a lot of money and kill people and eat a little pizza pepperoni on the side. And Cillian Murphy, he seems more of like the villain mentality. He's not doing it for any righteous cause or self-righteous, but it just seems like this kind of underlying, like he just wants to overthrow bureaucracy in the craziest way. And then Ra's al Ghul kind of has, it feels like almost like this Thanos mentality of like, we're gonna wipe out just this area just to kind of cleanse. It doesn't seem malicious towards anybody or towards anything. Maybe kind of at the the Wayne Enterprise and kind of how when they were trying to capitalize on the Depression. The League of Shadows was Wayne fought back, and now it's kind of this battle at the end to kind of triumph and overrule the city. And I think all of those villains kind of have their heroes that are fighting against them. Batman kind of fights all of them. Simultaneously, but you have Gary Oldman who's kind of doing the right justice thing. Rachel's kind of sleuthing out all of Cillian Murphy's strategies, and Batman's just kind of weaving in all of those narratives. Yeah, which we talked a lot about all the actors. I think Gary Oldman in this movie is obviously great. I think he gets better as these movies go on. He becomes a bigger part. Yes,
I think obviously Gary Oldman did a great job.
He gets promoted.
Yeah. For you, what would you say is like a favorite part of this movie? Like what draws like for you like when you look at this movie?
It's hard to say. I kind of like the end sequence when Gary Oldman's in the Batmobile.
Yeah.
And they're like, who authorized this? And he's like trying to figure out all these, little gadgets and kind of what's going on. I really like it's hard to pinpoint a specific scene. I really love the scene where Ra's al Ghul makes his reappearance at the dinner party. I think that's probably my favorite scene in this movie because it's so calculated and it kind of puts you on edge when you see him there, because that they have this kind of decorum and this formality where they're not going to just go at it in front of all of Bruce Wayne's guests. So he leaves it to Bruce. He goes, do you want to do this right here? Do you want to look around at all these casualties and do you want to enter the epic fight scene right now, or do you want to do something about this? And Bruce takes he's like, all right, I'm gonna fake this drunken tirade and rage at all my guests, and then we'll fight. I love that scene. I think there's a call to that in the Dark Knight. In a very similar sequence, which I called back, I think, to this scene. But I love that return and the reveal of the real Ra's al Ghul there.
Yeah, I was going to say, when you made that point, when you compare that scene to The Dark Knight, how when Ra's al Ghul comes in, he's calm, like you said, he's, do you want to do this right now? Everyone can leave, then we'll do it. Like, it's very gentlemanly. Whereas when the Joker comes in, he's shooting off a shotgun and he's
grabbing drinks.
Yeah, he's throwing stuff. He's eating the food. He goes in 110%. He goes in hard. And to see like the way the different villains kind of work and how they,
in a same setting.
Yeah, exactly, in the exact same setting. But yeah, I think that scene is phenomenal. I think that shows a lot of how great Liam Neeson is, how good of a job Christian Bale did on faking that drunken tirade to make sure that everyone leaves safely. And when you watch scenes like that, and you're looking at Batman, you're like, everyone hates him. Everyone hates Bruce Wayne, but you're like, oh, but he's saving you. He's saving your life right now. Yep. And that's a great scene. I think, for me, I gotta say, I think the scene when Scarecrow's the jig is up, they're onto him. Batman's already gone in, and I like the scene. The famous one where I think that they show a lot from that movie is when Cillian Murphy's like, the Batman.
Yep.
And he goes, and then he's like, I like that scene. I like the color. I like it's just like, it's very like Scarecrow. Like I like that. I like Scarecrow a lot as a villain. So
Yeah, he's
saying,
like bring it on. You know, like this is kind of what I've been assembling my army for. He's like, let's go.
Exactly. That's when he hits like peak madness in this movie, and you can see it in his eyes. That's what Cillian Murphy does so well, is that madness in his eyes that he carries. I mean, you see it a lot in his later roles. I think Dunkirk. Have you seen Dunkirk?
Once, yeah, when it came out.
When that scene on the boat where he's like, I can't go back, and he starts to like lose. He throws that kid down the stairs. Like, I think you see a lot of that same madness that he is able to pull and bring into the character. And so
when he kind of adopts the insanity that he's kind of been inflicting on everybody else. He
does a phenomenal job. I love that scene. I think that's very like the peak Scarecrow for me, so that's why I like it. He's one of my favorite villains from the Batman series.
I really like the. I would have thought that the special effects would not have held up as well as they did. I think they actually look, still pretty good. They're nothing exaggerated, but I think the context in which they're put into carries more weight than what they actually look like. The scene at the end where Batman is flying over Gotham and everybody's looking up at him and he's got those fire eyes and you're like, oh my god, Batman looks like a villain right now, and that carries way more weight than just the superficiality of adding a little bit of extra special effects in post.
Yeah, there's nothing that I was watching this movie and I went, it didn't look great. Like, I didn't even notice a lot of it. Like, it did such a good job of blending it all pretty seamlessly, even for the time, for being 15 years old and still holding up pretty perfectly.
I mean, even looking at Gotham, out of the monorail, like just on the flashback scene, it's like, that looked like a real city,
Yeah. I think, as far as, like, just an origin story goes, because this movie is just one big origin story, I think obviously they nailed it. I think this was one that when I first saw it and I kind of saw the other ones, I looked back and I was like, it was my least favorite. I didn't like it. And then going back and watching it again, I was like, this movie's damn good. Like, they did a phenomenal job making this movie. And I think I didn't give it enough credit because I think you can't compare it to The Dark Knight.
No.
And when you don't do that, it's phenomenal in its own right. And I think they did such a good job making this movie. I think, if for the audience, if you haven't seen it, just watch this movie, watch this trilogy, take some time in the new year and just like watch how amazing these movies are. Even if you're not a Batman fan, because I remember when The Dark Knight came out, and we'll talk more about that movie next week, but when I remember the movie came out and everyone was like, oh, this movie's so dark, it's dark, and someone like told my dad, like, don't take your son to it, and my dad's like, well, now we gotta go see this movie. And he's like not a big comic book, he didn't like comic books, he like, if you watch the Ant-Man shows, he's not like that into this stuff. But he was like, that was a good movie. Like, that was a good movie.
It's a phenomenal film,
Yeah, and it shows with this one as well. It's the same thing. This movie is outside of the realm of comic books. And I think that's something you can't really say about any of the MCU movies, besides maybe Iron Man and maybe one or two others. Outside of the realm of comic books, it's just a good movie.
Right.
Like, you just look at it for... Because if you look at it, this Batman series, the way Christopher Nolan did it, including this one, Batman doesn't even seem like the Batman from the comics. It seems like its own standalone 3 movies that have nothing to do with it. There's no source material, it feels like, and he did such a good job making it seem like that.
Right. Yeah, and all of the source material used doesn't feel like it was specifically pulled for this movie, but just exists within this movie because that's how it was written. Yeah. And I think there were a lot of liberties taken, too. I remember hearing somewhere that like the League of Shadows weren't really ever in the comics. They were just kind of created in this movie. Ra's al Ghul obviously was a big part of the comics, but the whole realm outside of that, I think, was put into this movie to give Bruce Wayne more of a reason, like, to kind of climb the ranks of something and to kind of train, in a Doctor Strange fashion. Yeah. And to kind of find himself and to kind of give more, I guess, motive and incentive, for Ra's al Ghul's overtaking, ultimately, of Gotham.
Yeah. So I think, as we're kind of getting to like 45 minutes here on the show, I think I got to give props to everyone who worked on this movie, man. I mean, this was a phenomenal movie. And when you look at, I think, a lot of the characters and the actors, and like, we could talk all day about how everyone did such a great job, but this movie alone is just fantastic. Easily, like, one of my favorite movies. And Batman, it's just, I think, there's so much you could do with Batman. Yep. And I think this was one of the first times, like, that a mass audience could fall in love with Batman. Because I think people liked Tim Burton's movies. A lot of people liked it, but it was a very niche kind of series. Mm-hmm. Nobody really liked George Clooney as Batman with the bat nipples.
No. Stiffy band bat nipples.
Val Kilmer did okay, I guess. And then now we have Ben Affleck, who did okay, I guess.
Yeah.
And so when you look at these movies and these three movies as a whole,
this is what you think of.
This is like, I think this is what the masses think of. I mean, I like I said, I'm a huge fan of Tim Burton's Michael Keaton movies, but I still think of this when I think of Batman. Like, how do you not think of these? Like, think of this movie. How do you not think of Cillian Murphy as the Scarecrow, Heath Ledger as the Joker? How do you not think of that when you think of Batman anymore? Like, this is like what pop culture now I think is set the standard of what a Batman movie should be.
And excluding, like when you think of Batman in the traditional sense, you think of Batman and Robin, right?
Yeah.
There's no Robin throughout this entire trilogy. It's carried by the weight of the hero, his journey, and the villains that create the universe, and just pull you into it from the get-go.
Yeah, which before we move on to the beer, we did not talk enough about Michael Caine as Alfred. I think he is what an Alfred needs to be. I think he nailed it. I think he was the perfect amount of, like, he's the butler, but he's also in charge. Like, I like the scenes of, like, you may be the owner of this house, but your dad put me in charge.
Right.
And I like that Michael Caine was able to bring that. And obviously he has some heart-wrenching scenes in the later movies, in the third one specifically, that we'll talk about when we get there. But I think my only downside of this movie is that a lot of this is I just want to get to the next one.
Right. Yeah. If you're going into this movie expecting to see, Batman, all of his gadgets, his utility, trying to, fight crime, the underbelly of Gotham, you're not going to get that. It's more of an internal struggle that I think you're right. It's in watching this movie later, we appreciate a lot more.
Yeah, definitely. I understood it better. I liked it a lot more. I understand where they're coming from. It might be slow in parts, but you understand why when you watch it again and like later in life. I think you understand the reasoning behind a lot of it. So I really appreciate this movie. I mean, if we were doing comicallys again, I'd give it an 9 out of 10.
Yep.
But
yeah, I thought it was great, and I love with the serious nature, there's still a little lighthearted, fun tone that I think Christian Bale and Morgan Freeman, Alfred all bring to their characters. There's little quips here and there. At the end when they're like, "Oh, the company just went public. What are you doing here?" He's like, "Yeah, I bought all the shares." Yeah. It's like, "What are you gonna do about it?" Just all those little things here and there to still make it kind of a fun journey and not feeling clenched up and tight the whole time, but to be able to kind of enjoy the flow of the movie.
Yeah, the movie takes itself seriously, but it can also breathe a little bit. It can expand a little. It can have some fun. And I think my favorite funny line in it is when after the manor gets set on fire and Bruce is underneath the plank of wood, and Michael Caine comes around, he's like, "What's the point of all those push-ups if you can't lift a plank of wood off yourself?" Like, I love that line.
Right, and then he looks at himself. He's like, "Yeah, you're right." He's like,
"Yeah," he just lifts it up.
Yeah,
I thought that was fantastic. But yeah, you're right. It's a movie that takes itself seriously. It's dark, it's gritty, but it can also be funny, and it can make you laugh a little bit. And I did laugh in this movie, and I've seen it a million times. I still laughed in this movie. It still holds up in that sense. So
I love the little chess game that he plays with Ra's al Ghul too. "Oh, I saved you, but you were almost dead," and then, "Oh, I saved you, but you were almost dead." It's like, I don't have to save you now. I love that scene at the end too when the train crashes and he just closes his eyes. Just so cool. And it does kind of leave it intentionally ambiguous if he is dead again or not.
Yeah.
And that's kind of fun that they don't close it on a hard note. Just to let your mind kind of race for what more there is to come.
Yeah, I did think it was funny how Batman in this series has the role of he doesn't kill. But he's like, "I'm not going to kill you, but I don't have to save you either." It's like, that's a loophole, man. You know what you're doing.
Right. Yeah.
You killed him inadvertently.
Right. Yeah.
But is there anything else you want to talk about before you go into the beer?
I don't think so. I think we pretty much covered everything, beginning to finish. It's like you said, I love the note that this movie ends on. It's so hard. I can't even imagine, had I seen this when it came out and it meant as much to me as it does now, waiting for The Dark Knight, especially knowing now how phenomenal that movie is. That would have just been an absolute, a couple of months, years just waiting for, because now we get to see Batman. That's what it's into. But I'm glad that we get to watch them kind of back to back here. That's pretty fun.
Yeah. Even the little scene you get where Gordon's like, there's a guy who's robbing banks. He leaves a calling card and he turns around, it's the Joker card, and you're like, Oh,
like,
is the Joker's coming? Here it is. It's him.
Right. Yeah. It's just so much anticipation, and you're like, all right, we have this origin story. Time to hit the ground running.
Yeah, exactly. So I think, do you want to go into the beer now?
Yeah, absolutely. Without further ado, so the one I chose this week, it's called Midnight Fog. I was thinking about the whole when they're vaporizing the gas at night, when everything's kind of going through the city.
I like the name.
The one thing I wanted to mention on that though was like the water vaporizer. Like, why didn't it vaporize the water in every human? Like everybody who was there. Like, why was it just selectively all the water in the pipes? But, we suspend our disbelief for, things like that. So Midnight Fog, it's a 9.6% gluten-reduced quadruple. So quadruple is, by definition, anything over 9.1%. So this is a dark ale. And the description is dark as the night and strong with notes of chocolate coffee, molasses, and brown sugar. So this is it. The brewery that it is from is called 12 Degree Brewing. Here's a picture of the crowler that they have. They do not distribute anywhere. So the only beer that you can get from them is actually at their location. They don't can anything. They don't do kegs. Everything is brewed in-house very meticulously. I've met the owner, John, several times. Very nice guy. They have a very cool kind of little, modern Italian kitchen in the back. A lot of old Edison light bulbs inside. It's just it's a very... very cool spot if you know where it is. They've won numerous awards. They kind of pride themselves on Belgian-style beers. A lot of their beers have kind of fun names. They have, my favorite there is the Walters White, which is a Belgian white beer, but they have like a Citra Self-Down, Citra Pale Ale. Ready to Mingle is like an imperial single that they have. So they kind of have fun with a lot of their stuff, but it has a very kind of authentic and rustic feel when you go in. All the beers are written in chalk on... little boards that they put up. They have little, trivia and kind of games around. It's a really cool spot. It's in downtown Louisville, right on Main Street, right off South Boulder Road, probably about 15 minutes from Boulder, if anybody's familiar with that area in Colorado. Just kind of one of my favorite little local spots. Super happy to grab this beer. Glad it worked in with the theme. It's actually pretty delicious. I don't normally drink a lot of dark beers, but it was snowing today and kind of felt like a dark beer day. Definitely tasted a lot of the coffee and molasses in there. It's definitely very rich, but kind of light at the same time. I was a big fan of it.
Nice.
Here we are.
See, now what I'm going to have to do is fly out to Colorado when the pandemic is on the tail end there and come check it out, because I was looking at this place. You'll fly here, I'll fly there.
Right. I'll start the podcast. Hello and welcome. You can use my setup, I'll use yours.
You're just gonna confuse people, Adam. You can't do that.
Okay, sorry.
All right, well, I think that wraps up Batman Begins. Adam, thank you for being here. I'm excited to do the next two. I think it's gonna be a lot of fun.
I can't wait for Dark Knight, man. That's gonna be awesome. So happy to kick off the new year with such a fantastic trilogy. Happy to be along for the ride for this one.
Awesome. Well, don't forget, guys, we're on YouTube as well as Twitter, Instagram. New episodes every Monday morning at 7 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Sometimes 6:30, depends on how I'm feeling. But thank you guys so much for listening. I hope you guys had a great new year, and hopefully you guys enjoy another year of Comically Incompetent. Adam, thanks again, and we'll see you guys next week.
Absolutely. Thanks, guys. See you soon.
Bye.
Bye.